There we go. Welcome, everybody, to the National Agriculture in the Classroom Conference, sponsored by BASF, CHS Foundation, and Corteva Agriscience. We're grateful for our sponsors for their continued support of agricultural literacy, and we're glad that you can be a part of this today. We encourage you to stay on for each session, but remember the sessions are being recorded and will be available on the National Agriculture in the Classroom website probably sometime next week for your review. This is the secondary track, and we are at the top of 3 o'clock Eastern time, and our next session is the big deal about Big Ag, and we have Andrea Gardner joining us from the National Center for Agricultural Literacy. She's an education specialist for their team. Prior to this position, she was a high school agri-science teacher, and throughout her career, Andrea has actively participated in professional development, mentoring, and development of curriculum. So we want to thank Andrea, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Michelle. As she introduced, my name is Andrea Gardner, and I'm excited to be with you today. Just while we're getting started, if you guys could just drop in the chat what grade and subject you choose, that will kind of help me dial in a little bit what we talk about today. So go ahead and just drop that in the chat anytime in the next little bit. We're going to start off actually with a Kahoot. And I think you might need to give me sharing, Michelle.
You should have full.
Oh, there it is. It came up. All right. Here we are.
So in
Okay, if you say it again.
We've got 6th grade ecology, environmental science, 6th grade so far.
Okay.
But there's more than that participating.
Yeah, I'll watch. Okay, so if you are on a desktop, pull out your phone so that you can participate in this Kahoot. This is a poll. It's not a quiz. It's just a poll. So there's not a right or a wrong answer yet. Do classic mode. Okay, so you can scan that QR code right there. I'll give you just a couple of minutes, not minutes, but give you a minute. So we got to get a few people in the Kahoot. Awesome. All right, looks like I might have maybe the majority. So let's get started. So these are some statements that I want you to determine if you think that they are true or false. Since you guys are teachers and not students, I will give you a little bit of a hint that we're going to be diving into some of these words. So pay attention closely to the words because they're going to bring up some questions that are important for our conversation. So the first one, large-scale farms are replacing small farms in the United States. Tell us if you think that is true or false. Okay, so 16 false and 8 true. Okay. Next one, large-scale commercial farms are replacing small family farms in the United States. True or false? Wow, right in the middle. That one tied. Okay, next question, family farms are dwindling in the United States. True or false? Okay, 15 true and 11 false. factory farms are replacing family farms in the United States? Okay, 18 false and 8 true. And the last one, industrialization is the process of transforming from a focus on agriculture to a reliance on manufacturing. True or false? Fifteen false and 11 true. Okay. All right. So that just kind of gives us a little bit of hopefully just some information to start thinking, start questioning. There were some words in these statements that hopefully stuck out to you that are making you kind of ask some questions to define what some of them mean. So next we are going to go, let me switch my screen share. Okay. I already did that. So this lesson, the purpose of it is to discover how technical advances and economic forces influence the size of farms in the United States, evaluate the pros and cons of large-scale agriculture for the production of our food, fuel, and fiber, and identify similarities and differences in commercial versus subsistence farming. Okay, so that is the purpose. Here's the questions that we just answered on Kahoot. I'm going to go to this next slide, and I've turned some of these words red. These are the words that hopefully you saw and that made you go, what does that mean? So for example, when we went from large scale farms, replacing small farms, when I added the word commercial, what did that make you think? How did that change your thoughts about the statement? Okay, I also added small family farms versus just small farms. So I added the word family. Okay, did that make your brain do anything or think anything different, make any different types of assumptions? Okay, again, I added family farms are dwindling in the United States. Okay, factory farms, what does the word factory mean? Okay, and then industrialization was the important word in the last one. So like I said, these statements are only meant to get you thinking, to get you starting to think about the size of farms in the United States. What is a family farm? What's a commercial farm? What's the term factory farms, etc. So hopefully that's all kind of jumbling around in your head. So we're going to go and define a couple of things right now. So this lesson really addresses the question of what influences the size of farms in the United States. So it is well thought of that small farms are a small number and that we have big farms provide our food. So the word commercial can sometimes have a negative kind of, trying to think how to say it, but sometimes it can have a negative thought towards it. So in the statements here, when we say a large scale commercial farm, sometimes people will use that in a negative tone with farms, but ultimately the word commercial only means that the farm sells the products they produce. So commercial has nothing to do with size. So what we're doing is sorting out as we classify farms. We're going to talk to them about size, about type. So do we grow something to sell and earn money, or do we grow, here's the opposite of a commercial farm, and that's a subsistence farm. So these products are not sold to a market. They're nearly all crops or livestock raised and used to maintain the farm and the farmer's family. Okay, this subsistence farm basically exists in developing countries. So not usually something that you're going to see in the United States. Okay, so commercial versus subsistence. Do we sell the product in a market to get money, or do we provide for ourselves using the crops that we produce. That's the first two ways that we can classify farms. The next way that term that we often use is the term of a family farm. Okay, so family farms are owned and operated by individuals in a family. Family farms can be any size. So I have some graphs here from the USDA that just tell us the amount of small farms, like how much land is operated. So blue is small family farms, green is mid. The kind of lime green colors, large scale family farms, and then orange is non-family farms. Okay, so this classification or this type is basically just ownership. So who owns the farm? Is it a family that owns the farm, or is it a non-family farm? Okay, so still the majority of farms, so down here, when we look at the number of farms, the majority of farms are actually small family farms. Then we have our mid-sized family farms right here, our large scale here, and our non-family farms here. Okay, so if we go back to those statements again, are small family farms going away? No, there's still the abundance of the number of farms in the United States by ownership, but we're going to keep adding on to that. So hang on. Just checking my Q&As to make sure there's not something there yet. Okay, so next thing is large versus small. So the words large and small are just all in comparison. So large and small don't really have a definition. So the USDA actually did give them a definition, since large and small is just relative. So they use the following scale. So if you look at this, a small farm has a GCFI, which is a gross cash farm income of less than $350,000. Okay, mid-size is 350 to $1 million. And then large scale is $1 million and more. Okay, so when we are talking about classifying a farm as small, medium, or large, this is what they use to classify the farms. Let me give you a little bit of background why. So these classifications have nothing to do with the number of animals a livestock farmer has or the number of acres that a farmer cultivates. That is kind of the first thought that you'd think of in your head to try and get an idea of how big a farm is. But the reason that that is not used in these statistics is because it's relative to your geography and your climate. So I'll give you the example. I live in southern Utah, the desert country. If you can picture the Grand Canyon or Zion's National Park, Red Rocks, very little water. So we do have public lands here that we graze cattle on, but the number of cattle per acre is very, very small compared to other parts of the country that get a lot of rain and can graze a lot of animals on the same acreage. So comparing acreage it's not comparable. It's going to be different depending on your climate, how much rain you get, etc. You can find the same thing in the bread belt of the United States. The states that have more water are going to produce more food per acre than those that have less water. Okay, so hopefully that helps you kind of understand why it does kind of, anytime that you're really looking into statistics, you really do need to use your thinking cap and critically think a few things. There are, and I'll point those out as we go, but there are some, by using the GCFI, it does kind of, I don't want to say skew, but you have to take into consideration the commodity, because some commodities have a very high, it doesn't take into account your expenses. Okay, it only takes into account how much you sell your commodity for. Okay, so if you have a really high expense and a just barely higher gross income, you might only earn a little bit, but you're still going to be considered on the larger scale of a farm based on your cash income. Okay. All right, so looking at these statistics are very interesting to me. Here we have the small family farms, 89%, it's not family, sorry, just small. We're only looking at size here. So 89.1% of farms in the United States are considered small because their cash income is $350,000 or less. Okay, then we take a huge nosedive. We're looking at the orange. 5.6% of farms are mid-size, 3.2 are large scale, and 2.2 are non-family. Okay, so that is just the number of farms, the share of farms. I also want to look at the share of production. So that's the yellow. So we have 89% of our farms only produce 17% of the agricultural production that we have in the United States. So the actual products that are being sold, sent to our food chain, etc. So a huge, almost 90% of our farms only produce 17% of what we're eating. Okay, I'm going to skip the middle one and go to the large scale. Large scale farms are only 3.2% of farms, but they produce 46.5% of the total agricultural production that we have in the United States. Okay, that's kind of staggering, but it does give you a little bit of perspective as we start to think about farm size, pros and cons. Why do we have larger farms? What benefit do we have because of them? And ultimately, what would we do if we didn't have large farms? What if we went back to smaller and medium-sized farms? Okay. All right. Any questions? I'm going to give you a chance because this was a lot to take in. Do you have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Okay, I'm not seeing them come up yet. So let's explore some farms. I have a tool for you that is used in this lesson that will help your students get an idea and a picture of what farms look like in the United States. I'm going to turn my background off so that you can see these. Okay, so these are farm profile cards. You can print these. These are connected in the lesson, and you can print them and cut them apart yourself, or you can buy a classroom set from the Ag Classroom store. So each of these cards, so there's a set of cards that has 21 farms in it, but it comes in a classroom set that's color coded. So we have a red set and a purple set and a green set, etc. So there's 6 colors so that you can divide your class into 6 groups and give each group one complete set of farm profile cards. Okay, so on the farm profile cards, what students are going to find is, and these are hypothetical farms, but on these cards, they're going to have a hypothetical situation of who owns the farm, what commodity that they produce, what their gross cash income is. So this shows the math that was used to figure out the size, like the gross cash income of a farm. So it's taken from average numbers. I used a contact from the USDA that has a great deal to do with the collection of all these statistics. But he's the one that kind of helped me come up with these numbers. So these are averages. Obviously, specific farms are going to have some differences, but these are averages to kind of help students get an idea of the size of farms. Okay, and the last one is the final market commodity. So what happens to the product that they produce? That's going to have students determine, is this a commercial farm or is this a subsistence farm? Okay, so if we go through these, I told you that gross cash farm income was a little bit different for different commodities. And I'll show you with milk. If we were in person, I'd have you guess, but how small do you think, how many cows do you think a dairy farmer needs to have a gross cash farm income of less than $350,000 per year? Okay, there's a question for you. And I'm going to give you the answer using this farm profile card. So again, these are hypothetical farms. This one's called Evergreen Acres. The Brown family has been farming for 3 generations, currently owned and operated by father and one of his sons. Actually, this one's not the small one. Let me get to the right one. Here we go. Okay. The Jones family has been farming for 3 generations in New York. The farm currently owned by a grandfather and operated by his grandson. They have 75 Jersey cows in their milk herd. So when we were going through these statistics, a dairy farm, because dairies have high income, a dairy farm can't have more than 75 cows, or they will have a cash income of more than $350,000. It doesn't mean they're earning $350,000 because that is not including their expenses, and those are important to the economics of a farm. But the way the statistics are taken, this is what it would be classified as. Okay, so kind of interesting. I'll show you, this is the worksheet that the students are going to work with, but they have this at their desk. And what they do is go through these farm profile cards and place the card right here in the middle. And then they can figure out all the information that it asks for. So this is mirrored. The commodity that they're producing, their income, who owns it. So they're going to be able to put this down and say, okay, this is a large farm. It's a commercial farm, or it's a subsistence farm. It's a family farm. It's a non-family farm. So they'll be able to just sort through those details that are used to figure out the type of farms that we have in the United States. Okay, so this is that activity. Like I said, if you want to save the printing, these cards can be purchased from Ag Classroom Store. They're brand new in the store because this is a brand new lesson. Okay, so let me go back to screen sharing. Okay, let me check. I think I did see some questions in here. Do we know how many family farms are leasing to non-family operators? The family farms are owned, not necessarily operated by families, correct? So yes, the definition is technically they're owned and operated by families. But we'd really have to dig down deep to make sure that that was, that we were looking at that correctly. So let me just look at. So yes, that does take place, but really in the collection of data is what's going to define that one way or another. So that's the best answer that I can give you. I will tell you that it is a little bit mind-boggling. when I was writing this lesson, I spent a lot of time just really trying to dig down to understand. And that's kind of the nature of statistics. And with your students, that's something, as far as ag literacy goes, to really help them understand, is that you really have to look into statistics and really understand, like, what are they asking? How is the data collected, et cetera, to make sure that you're understanding the message of the data that we're looking at. So that is a tricky situation that is, you'd have to really look into. And those cards look great. Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, so we just explored some farms. This shows you, just if you couldn't see it, what I was holding up. Students can hold up the card and then figure out what type of farm it is. Okay, these cards could be used for a lot of things. Just really, I think it's really helpful for students to just get a picture in their mind of what a farm looks, you know, how big is it? How many animals are there? Where does the product go? What's the purpose of the farm, etc. So those cards are going to have some good use. All right. Okay, so question. What has made it possible for farms to get larger? Okay, this is definitely something that we want to think about. And a part of understanding why, just understanding the size of farms. Why are farms getting larger? You know, how do we have farms with 5,000 cows? I don't consider myself super old, but I did move sprinkler pipe growing up by hand. We didn't even have wheel lines at our farm. You know, the amount of cows that my family milked was, anyway, like, what makes it possible? Like, what limits us? And the thing that limits the size of a farm is what we're going to get to next, and that's technology. So this is an activity in the lesson that you can give them a worksheet that they can, there's QR codes on it that students can pull up the Growing a Nation timeline. If you haven't heard of this, this is one of the National Ag in the Classroom resources that we have for history, and that is an interactive timeline. So this timeline leads to some information that you'll find on that timeline. So basic information of US population and the percentage of that population that are farmers, okay? So if we start in 1790, there were 3.9 million people in the United States, and 90% of them were farmers. Okay, up to 122.7 million in 1930, 21% were farmers. 151.1 million in 1950, 12% farmers. 1970 is 204.3 million for 4.6% of farmers made up the labor force. And then today we have that many, 287 in 2000 and 331 million in 2020. Okay, and a labor force of around 1%. Okay, so if you had your students really looking at this at this point, we really need to understand that the population is going way up while the number of farmers is going way down. So how is that possible? Okay, it's possible because of technology. So here's just a few things on the timeline. By no means is this all, but just to highlight a few. In the 1700s, the cast iron plow, tractors, understanding and using fertilizers and pesticides, science, vaccines for livestock, improved genetics, bioengineering, robotics. So across this timeline, every technology that we've been able to develop has increased our ability to have fewer farmers feed more people. Okay. So that's that. There is a video that's embedded in this lesson that I want to show you on the topic of technology. And just make sure I get to the right one. All right, can we see the lesson plan? Is my screen share on?
Yes, yeah, Andrea, we can see the matrix.
Oh, here we go. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is the lesson on the matrix, and let me put the link. I think I would need, well, I think if I put it in the chat, can other people see it?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, somehow the chat was disabled on the back end, so
That was the wrong one.
about that.
Okay, so there's the link. Okay, so here's the lesson plan on the matrix. There's the purpose. If you haven't been to the matrix, definitely invite you to check it out. Here's the materials you needed, the slide deck, things to print off. Here's where you can get the farm profile cards in the store if you'd like to, etc. Everything's on there. So I'm going to scroll down to this video. And again, the big question here that you're trying to answer is what has made it possible for farms to get larger? Okay, why didn't we have 5,000 cow dairies 50 or 75 years ago? Okay.
We have Adrienne Parker has her hand raised if she wants.
Efficiency of farms all over the world. It can't come soon enough. By the year 2050, the human population will be nearly 10 billion, which means we'll need to have doubled the amount of food we now produce. This is an examination of the agricultural innovations coming down the pipeline that will help get us there. The industry has undergone major developments over the last century. 100 years ago, farming looked like this. Today, it looks like this, and tomorrow, it'll look something like this. These changes have allowed many of us to do other things with our lives. In 1900, about 11 million agricultural workers produced the food for 76 million people. Today, just 6.5 million workers feed 321.4 million Americans. Two factors were most responsible for this surge in productivity: engines and the widespread availability of electricity. Today, the innovations on our immediate horizon include autonomous pickers. UK researchers have already created one that gathers strawberries twice as fast as humans. The challenge will be creating robotic pickers that can switch between all kinds of crops. robots or drones that can precisely remove weeds or shoot them with a targeted spritz of pesticide, using 90% less chemicals than a conventional blanket sprayer. For the organic farmer, they could zap the weeds with a laser instead. This could have a big impact. The UN estimates that each year, between 20 and 40% of global crop yields are destroyed by pests and disease. Tiny sensors and cameras will monitor crop growth and alert farmers on their smartphones if there's a problem or when it's the best time to harvest. The Bonnie Rob can take a soil sample, liquidize it, then analyze its pH and phosphorus levels all in real time. As a proof of concept for all this autonomous farming technology, researchers at Harper Adams in the UK plan to grow and harvest an entire hectare of barley without humans ever entering the field. Companies like Egg Robotics have already commercialized software that analyzes drone-captured infrared images to spot unhealthy vegetation. Then, like a real-life game of Sim Farmer, the grower is alerted on their device when a troubled area is identified. Machine learning is regularly improving the system's ability to differentiate between varieties of crops and the weeds that threaten them. Not to be left out, a company called Mavericks contracts 100 pilots to fly light aircraft that are outfitted with multispectral cameras on data gathering missions over large farms throughout the country. For an even wider view, Planet Labs operates a fleet of CubeSats that take weekly images of entire farms from space to help monitor crops. Other companies are creating analytics software to act as farm management systems, allowing growers of all sizes to deal with this new tsunami of data. And the Farmers Business Network combines data from many farms into one giant pool to give its members the power of macro-level insights that have traditionally only been available to corporate mega farms. Vertical farms are essentially warehouses with stacks of hydroponic systems to grow leafy greens. They're sprouting up in cities all over the world where fresh produce and land is scarce. The key obstacle here is the cost of energy and the toll using a lot of it takes on the environment. The upside is that artificial lights and climate-controlled buildings allow crops to grow day and night year-round, producing a significantly higher yield per square foot than an outdoor farm. For now, though, only expensive leafy greens like lettuce or herbs like basil have proven profitable in the vertical system. And the jury is definitely still out on whether this is truly an environmentally friendly technique. One possible solution is to use blue and red light wavelengths to optimize photosynthesis and turbo boost growth, a technique tested by researchers at Project Growing Underground, an experimental farm operating in old World War II bomb shelters underneath London. Another advancement in indoor farming is the Open Agriculture Initiative, which aims to create a catalog of climates so temperature and humidity can be set to recreate the perfect conditions for growing crops that would normally come from all over the world locally instead. This is an attempt to tackle the food miles issue. When produce is shipped around the world, it creates unnecessary CO2 emissions. Just look at where a few of the items you'll eat today were cultivated to understand how big of a problem this is. The millions of people entering the middle class every year in developing countries are demanding tens of millions of pounds of additional meat. These ideas aim to get the most from every.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. It goes on to talk about all sorts of different technologies on the farm with livestock, etc. So again, this is just really asking the question, what has made it possible for us to have larger farms and fewer farmers compared to the population that we have? Okay, if a question says, actually, it's an issue of distribution. We produce plenty, much is wasted and food perishing contributes significantly to CO2 and therefore the climate crisis. Is that your understanding? Maybe add a little bit to that question, because ultimately what we're looking at, food waste is definitely a big issue, but what we're looking at is why have farms gotten bigger? What determines the size of a farm? So looking at it, so we've looked at it from the perspective right now of just understanding that technology is what's made it possible. We didn't have the technology 50 and 75 years ago to have these large farms, and now we do, so we can. And then the next thing we're going to look at is why. Okay, so in activity 3, you're gonna have students looking at the economy, economies of scale specifically, to answer the question of what benefit does it have to be big, or what challenge is there to being small, or and vice versa. Okay, so let's watch this video on economies of scale. This might be something you're familiar with, but
economies of scale is a term frequently used in microeconomics to describe situations in which, as your business grows, you can produce at a lower cost per unit. A lot of times, this happens thanks to fixed costs working in your favor. Let's assume John starts a business which involves making small wooden airplanes and selling them at 20 bucks each. For the sake of simplicity, we'll also assume that A, he does everything himself, B, his only fixed cost is the $1,000 monthly he pays to rent the space he needs, with utilities included free of charge. C, his variable costs are the various parts he uses for his airplanes, which amount to $5 per plane. His first month is awful, with only 10 orders. He generates $200, but has to pay $1,050 to make those planes, $1,000 to cover his rent and $50 in variable costs. As such, he loses money because his per plane cost is a whopping $105. His second month, however, is great, with him receiving 500 orders. He generates $10,000 and pays $3,500, $1,000 for rent and $2,500 in variable costs, securing a more than decent $6,500 profit. His per plane cost is now a much lower $7. The fact that his rent didn't go up along with the order volume, so the fixed cost dimension helped a lot. However, economies of scale can also work in his favor by, for example, negotiating bulk deals on materials and bringing his variable costs down. Unfortunately, there are limits involved, such as 1, John eventually needing more space, 2, his supplier running out of inventory, forcing him to buy from more expensive vendors, 3, the local market being saturated, making it necessary to find customers in other regions, with shipping costs added to the mix, and so on.
okay, so that's just a really quick 1 minute of what the economies of scale is. Back. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of switching in my screen share. All right, so here's the technology slide. Here's the economies of scale. We just watched this video. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. That video gave you a plane example. Let me give you a couple agricultural examples. So I'm going to look at this first one of livestock feed. So livestock usually eat some type of grain, for chickens and pigs and cattle to some extent, sheep. Corn is one grain that they eat. So a 50-pound bag of cracked corn at a local feed store is going to be somewhere around $24, which would make the corn about 48 cents per pound. Okay, contrast that to a larger scale farm, even a medium scale farm, and they are not going to purchase corn in bags, they're going to purchase it by the semi-load. So a semi-load of rolled corn might cost $360 per ton, or 18 cents per pound. So you can see that there's a big advantage in the cost of grain for a large farm versus a small farm. Okay. Another example is labor. Labor is a big expense for most agricultural producers. So they have to have enough labor to be able to plant, manage, and harvest their crops, whether they're plants or managing livestock and other animals. So on average, labor accounts for 14% of total farm cash expenses. Farm laborers assist in producing a product that can be marketed and sold for a cash exchange. So here's your example. If one farm worker can operate an older style swather, so sickle knife, this is what I got, swather for 8 hours and swath 52 acres. So most farmers are going to work longer than 8 hours when they're swathing, but I just rounded that number off. So if we're thinking or talking about an hourly wage for one employee, they can drive this tractor or this swather, or if the same farm worker, so for the same cost of labor, can operate a bigger swather with more technology for the same 8 hours, they could swath 125 acres for the same labor expense. Okay, so you can see that's more than double the crop that's being swathed and harvested for the same cost of labor. Okay, so the other thing to take into consideration is larger, newer equipment is more efficient in fuel consumption. It does more work for the same cost. Technology is a big part, and we could list on and on and on about different technology that impacts the cost of agricultural production. Anything from planters, bale stackers, robots, etc. Okay, affordability is really critical. Most large farms can afford more technology than small farms, so that kind of increase, like it widens the gap between large and small, favoring large farms versus small farms. So in summary, what we want to look at is, what are the pros and cons of large scale agriculture? Okay, is it good? Is it bad? And ultimately, it's not an ultimatum of it's one or the other. It's looking at the pros and cons and our perspectives. Okay, so this is something you can use with your students just to help them start thinking of these pros and cons. There's an activity that there's a worksheet in there that you can have them list the pros and cons and look at both sides. But ultimately, what I want you to do in the last couple of minutes, and since the question and answer is the only option here, is I want you to consider this question: how would our world look different if we didn't have large scale farms? Okay. If you have something to answer, just put it in the Q&A box. So it's not a question, but you put the answer and I want to see your answer. How would our world look different if we didn't have large scale farms? Okay, so oftentimes maybe public perception is looking at these extremely large farms and they're asking questions, which is good to ask questions, but they're wondering, is this good or is it bad, or what are the pros and cons? Let's imagine that we take those farms out. So we're losing 3.2% of farms along with 46.5% of our agricultural products. Okay. If that happened, what type of domino effect would that create? And would it be good, or would it be bad, or would it be neutral? Got a couple coming in. Cost of products may be more expensive, less supply, increased costs, world hunger would increase, or some answers that people have given. There's definitely a lot to chew on, if that's a good, there's definitely a lot to chew on there to start thinking, oh, wow, what do large farms bring? What do small farms bring? And again, there isn't a hard and fast answer that many people are looking for, just absolutes. And this isn't something that we can have absolutes in. This is something that we have to evaluate. It's different for each country, across the world. It's different there's just a lot of differences to really look into, but an excellent question to really have people think on the side of economics. Social issues can be brought into here. I've got another answer. Without large farms, people would have to go back to producing their own food rather than going to the grocery store. Certainly more people would have to produce food. Many people would learn the hard way about how much work and finances it would take. Okay, definitely bring a lot more ag literacy to people, right? Anyway, so that's kind of what I have. If there are any more questions, we're rolling down to the last couple of minutes. Make sure that you saw in the chat the link to the lesson. Let me know if you didn't get it, but I think
It should be in the chat, and I think I dropped it in there as well. So
okay, so you should get it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd love to have you use that. I am actually looking for some pilot testers of this lesson because it is brand new. If this fits well in your curriculum, it's an exact fit for APHG, AP Human Geography, some social studies classes. You could definitely bring it into agriculture classes. Reach out to me. I should probably go back. This slide has my email if you want to take a screenshot of it. But I'd love to hear from you if this is something that you can pilot test in the upcoming year. We try to get a few teachers to do it in their classroom, make sure that we can make some updates and keep it the most relevant as possible.
Thank you, Andrea. What an amazing presentation. It's always eye-opening to see how the data is collected and how it impacts just our world around us and, locally, nationally, and internationally. Thanks to our audience for joining us. A special thanks to our sponsors, BASF, CHS Foundation, and Corteva Agriscience. Our next session will start at the top of the hour at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Please join us for Small but Mighty Microgreens in the Classroom. And if there's no other questions, we will wrap up and wait for our next session at 4 o'clock with Chris.